Trump, tariffs, and the new frontlines of the U.S. China trade war. Get ready, because the U.S. China trade war is about to enter a whole new chapter. And if you thought things had already reached a boiling point, think again. On April 13, former President Donald Trump took to social media with a post longer than most political speeches, laying out what he called a long-term strategy to reclaim America's economic dominance and put China in the wings of history. This wasn't just a routine rant, it was a full-throated declaration of economic warfare and a signal that the days of soft policy are over. Let's break down what Trump said, what he really meant, and why this post may be a roadmap to one of the most aggressive trade strategies we've ever seen from the United States. First, Trump used the post to respond to widespread media reports suggesting he had exempted Chinese electronics from a brutal new 125% reciprocal tariff. According to Trump, those reports were misleading. He clarified that Chinese electronics weren't fully exempt, they had simply been moved to a different tax category, the fentanyl tax list. Under this category, these products are still slapped with a 20% tariff. So, not a free pass, just a different kind of hit, and that's where the confusion started. Trump accused the mainstream media, especially what he called face news, of intentionally misrepresenting the situation to make him look weak. His argument? The media either misunderstood the complexity of his layered tax policy or intentionally left out key facts to smear him. And to be fair, it's not entirely the media's fault. The tax system Trump laid out is dizzyingly complex. We're talking overlapping tariffs, shifting tax categories, and ever-changing exemption lists. For the average person, following this is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. Here's how it works. Trump imposed a 10% basic tariff on goods from all countries. But with China, things are turned up a notch. Chinese goods get hit with a 20% fentanyl tax, which replaces the basic tariff. On top of that comes the heavy-hitting 125% reciprocal tariff, except for select items temporarily moved to other lists. So for many products, China's total tariff ends up being 145%. Sound confusing? That's because it is. And that confusion gave rise to headlines suggesting Chinese electronics were off the hook, which, as Trump insisted, they most certainly are not. Trump didn't just stop at clarifying the tax codes. He laid out a bigger vision. He explained that the reason some electronics were temporarily spared from the 125% tariff is because they're part of a national security review into the U.S. semiconductor supply chain. These products aren't being let off easy, they're just being prepared for a more specialized kind of scrutiny. Think of it as being pulled aside for a special screening at the airport. Why focus on semiconductors? Because Trump believes that America must not let a critical industry, especially one so central to modern tech, fall under the control of hostile trading nations, a phrase he used explicitly to describe China. This is where things start to sound less like economic policy and more like Cold War planning. But trade war talk aside, Trump's post also hinted at something else. A massive domestic tax cut plan already making its way through Congress. His vision is to usher in an era of prosperity, filled with high-paying jobs and strong American manufacturing. In his words, America will be great again, this time through an aggressive economic playbook. The trade strategy, he said, will rest on two pillars. First, a universal low baseline tax, 10% on imports from all countries. Second, targeted sector-based tariffs aimed squarely at industries the U.S. wants to bring back home. The high reciprocal tariffs. Temporary bargaining chips. Their purpose is to cause enough discomfort abroad that trading partners are forced to negotiate seriously, or face long-term consequences. Examples of these sector-specific tariffs are already in place. There's a 25% import tax on steel and aluminum. A 25% tax on cars and car parts. These are designed to force companies in key industries, automotive, shipbuilding, heavy equipment manufacturing, to move their factories back to American soil. The next target? Semiconductors and smartphones. Companies like TSMC and Apple could soon find themselves under pressure to shift operations to U.S. territory. Trump's model mirrors China's Made in China 2025 initiative, but in reverse, and with America as the endgame. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and trade representative officials, the semiconductor review won't take long, just 1 or 2 months. After that, we'll likely see a new set of sector-specific tariffs laid out clearly. This clarity, Trump's team believes, will give markets the predictability they crave. Investors hate uncertainty. Once the dust settles and people see the full plan, Trump thinks confidence will return, and the stock market will reflect it, but that's just the first part. What really makes Trump's post explosive isn't just the tax talk, it's the language he used when referring to China. He mentioned China 3 times. And each time, the tone got sharper. First, he called China the country that has treated the U.S. most unfairly in trade. Second, while discussing the semiconductor supply chain, he labeled China a hostile trading nation. And third, near the end of the post, he declared that the U.S. would treat other countries based on how they treat America, especially China, but let's focus on the phrase hostile trading nation. That's a serious term. It goes beyond calling China a competitor. It brands China as an adversary, essentially an enemy of American economic interests. That label has never been used so directly before, and it signals a dramatic escalation in rhetoric, and it wasn't just talk. Trump had already slapped a 125% tariff on Chinese goods. The name-calling came after the punch, making it feel like a formal announcement of a new era of economic confrontation. Right now, Xi Jinping's China isn't backing down. China has halted rare earth exports to the U.S., vowed to fight to the bitter end, and is working behind the scenes to form alliances that challenge American dominance. Trump's message in return: if you push, we'll push harder. If you insult us, we'll hit back harder. The gloves are off, and the era of polite diplomacy may be on pause. Whether you agree with Trump or not, his latest post makes one thing clear: the next phase of U.S. trade policy isn't just about balancing spreadsheets. It's about reshaping the world order. This is no longer just a trade war. It's an ideological clash, an economic chess match, and a high-stakes gamble on America's future. The question now is, who will blink first? Let's start with what's happening right now. The U.S. has announced a temporary exemption, just 1 to 2 months, for certain Chinese products that are part of Apple's and the semiconductor industry supply chains. On paper, it looks like a pause. A breather. But don't be fooled. This isn't retreat, it's a strategic inhale before the next big move. Former President Donald Trump hasn't admitted to lifting tariffs on these goods. Instead, he's moved them to a different category under what he calls the fentanyl tax list. That means they're still taxed, just differently. But here's the real twist: behind the scenes, many of these products might remain quietly exempt from full tariffs while Washington finishes crafting its next move. This is Trump's hallmark strategy: 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or sometimes 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. It may look chaotic, but over a few months, the end result is often irreversible. What looks like a slowdown is actually a calculated reset of the tempo. Geopolitically, Singapore walks a tightrope. It relies on the U.S. for military protection while enjoying close economic ties with China. In an era when superpowers demand loyalty, hedging both sides is becoming harder by the day. There was a time when countries like Singapore could act as mediators, neutral grounds where East met West. But as the US-China rivalry intensifies, that role shrinks. Mediators are now viewed with suspicion by both camps. To understand what's at stake, we look back at World War II, and the curious case of Switzerland. Geographically surrounded by Nazi forces, and far smaller than Poland, Switzerland somehow survived untouched. Why? Not because of treaties or military might, but because it held the vaults. Swiss banks stored the fortunes of Europe's elite. To invade Switzerland would have been to wage war against the rich. Hitler chose not to. Switzerland's strategy: armed neutrality. No NATO membership, no nuclear arsenal, and yet, one of the safest, most stable countries in the world. Their strength came not from paper alliances, but from real-world leverage, money, trust, and reputation. Switzerland didn't simply avoid choosing sides, they made themselves indispensable to both. Of course, no two nations are the same. Singapore cannot simply replicate Switzerland's model, nor can Vietnam. But both can learn from the principle: survival for small countries lies not in military strength, but in practical decisions, long-term positioning, and understanding how to be valuable to the world's biggest powers, without becoming dependent on them, whether it's Vietnam choosing between railroads and seaports, or Singapore navigating between Washington and Beijing. Small nations are once again proving that in a world of giants, strategy, not size, is what defines your fate. The global order is shifting, and these are the quiet battlegrounds where tomorrow is being decided. Xi Jinping's recent visit to Vietnam reflects China's push to consolidate influence. While his trip produced a flurry of agreements, most were broad frameworks, not concrete contracts. Vietnam, aware of the stakes, is not rushing into commitments. But the direction of investment, rails or ports, will speak volumes in the months ahead. Meanwhile, President Trump's priority is clear: block Chinese goods from dominating the U.S. market. America remains the world's most lucrative consumer base, with a third of global purchasing power. Competitors across Asia and Latin America are jostling for a chance to take over market share lost by China. Vietnam could be a big winner, but only if it continues to align more closely with the U.S. However, tariffs alone won't bring Vietnam closer. If Washington wants to outmaneuver Beijing, it will need more than sticks, it will need carrots. That means offering Vietnam attractive alternatives, easier access to capital, infrastructure financing, and investment guarantees. In this escalating trade war, Vietnam isn't just a player, it's the first battlefield. And the outcome may set the tone for others in the region. Now, let's turn our gaze to Singapore. Once a sleepy port, now a gleaming global hub, it's often called the Switzerland of Asia. With Hong Kong's fall from grace, many pinned their hopes on Singapore to become the next great financial sanctuary, but there's a catch. Singapore's appeal to wealthy investors, especially those fleeing mainland China's tightening grip, has also become its vulnerability. Many of these new elites maintain deep ties to Beijing. And Singapore, despite its image of efficiency and rule of law, has been rocked by high-profile money laundering scandals. Billions of illicit dollars, and even government officials, have been caught up. Its small size and high visibility make it easy to scrutinize, and easy to pressure. In the great chessboard of global politics, small nations aren't just pawns, they're strategic pieces with the potential to shape the board. Today, Vietnam and Singapore sit at the heart of a growing power struggle between the United States and China. Their choices, whether cautious or bold, may define not just their future, but influence the world's balance of power. Let's start with Vietnam. Over 30% of its exports are tied to the US, making America its largest single market. But while Vietnam leans on the US for trade, its access to international capital, especially for infrastructure and industrial growth, is increasingly limited. Traditional sources like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and Japan cannot meet Vietnam's swelling needs. That leaves a vacuum, and China is moving quickly to fill it. China's approach is well-worn: build infrastructure, deepen influence. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China offers loans and large-scale construction projects, especially to countries that struggle with Western credit requirements. These nations may lack access to cheap capital, but they are rich in strategic location. Southeast Asia, with its shipping lanes and supply chain hubs, is a prize both economic and geopolitical. In this setting, Vietnam faces a pivotal choice. If it builds railways connecting deeply into China's southern provinces, it physically, and economically, locks its future closer to Beijing. But if it focuses on maritime infrastructure, like deep-water ports, it can pivot towards global trade routes dominated by the US and Europe. For a small country, just a few major projects can tilt the entire industrial layout of the next generation. At this stage, it's no longer just about tariffs, deficits, or manufacturing jobs. It's about world order. Influence. Who gets to shape the rules? The US is pushing for a realignment of global trade, a return of industry, and a remapping of supply chains. China is fighting to keep its central role in the global economy, and offering investment as its leverage. We're not witnessing a negotiation. We're watching a high-stakes geopolitical race, where time, money, and influence are the ultimate weapons. So as the headlines keep rolling in, remember, this isn't just a trade war. It's a new kind of conflict for a new kind of world. And no one's backing down yet. Now let's talk about Vietnam, where Chinese President Xi Jinping just arrived as the first stop in a Southeast Asian tour. At first glance, it seems China's winning there too. Vietnam had an $83.7 billion trade deficit with China in 2024, but the situation is more nuanced. Vietnam's most urgent need from China isn't consumer goods, it's investment in infrastructure. And that's the card China is playing. For smaller economies, industrialization without external capital is nearly impossible. They have two real choices: attract foreign investment or build a massive export surplus to fund domestic growth. South Korea chose the second path, and it worked. In the 1960s and 70s, with support from the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, South Korea built roads, power grids, and agricultural systems. Then came loans from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and eventually, the global commercial market. South Korea grew by choosing the right partners. That's the unspoken subtext of Xi Jinping's trip, offering countries like Vietnam an alternative to US-aligned development models, and that's where the real chess game begins. Now, China's not just sitting back. According to Reuters, Chinese government agencies have entered a wartime posture. Officials from the Ministries of Commerce and Foreign Affairs have cancelled all leave and are on high alert. Their mission? Track U.S. negotiations with other countries and make their own offers, fast. China knows that time is Trump's enemy. If they can delay, disrupt, or distract the U.S., they might outlast the momentum of the Trump administration. And what's China's message to the world? It's simple: if you align with the US and hurt our interests, don't expect anything from us. In contrast, Trump's stance is, if you're not with us, don't expect access to our markets. The world is being asked to choose sides, and the pressure is growing. The urgency doesn't stop at trade. Trump is also pushing for a sweeping domestic tax cut, and he wants it implemented this year. Why? So that companies can show higher profits in their year-end reports. So that families feel the benefit before tax season rolls around. So that everyone, from CEOs to middle-class workers, sees results in time for the election, but tax cuts aren't magic. If you cut taxes, government revenue drops. That means you've got to cut spending, too, or risk blowing past the federal budget ceiling. Enter Elon Musk. Recently, Musk's companies have been working closely with Washington to find ways to reduce the government's fiscal deficit. It's a signal that everyone aligned with Trump's economic plan understands the stakes. Delay the tax cuts, and the deficit balloons. Give Democrats an opening, and the whole reform agenda is at risk. Everything must happen in parallel: tax cuts, spending cuts, trade war escalations, and it must happen fast. Zoom out, and two clear trends emerge from Trump's latest policy signals. First, the U.S. is pivoting from general reciprocal tariffs to industry-specific tariffs, especially in strategic sectors like semiconductors, electric vehicles, and AI hardware. The goal? Bring production back to American soil. It's industrial policy wrapped in trade law. Second, the U.S. is no longer just treating China as a competitor, it's officially labeling it a hostile trading nation. That's a major escalation in rhetoric, and it's not just talk. The shift from global tariffs to a China-focused economic offensive is already in motion. And by the end of this year, it may be fully in place. Why now? Because the clock is ticking. The U.S. presidential term lasts 4 years, with a midterm election smack in the middle. If Trump wants big results before voters head back to the polls, the time to act is now. And if Democrats regain control of even one chamber of Congress, progress on any of his reforms becomes nearly impossible. Now, some observers have rushed to call this exemption a victory for China. But that's missing the forest for the trees. It's not just naive, it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how both the US and China play this game. Let's be clear, both countries use the same tactic: impose heavy tariffs first, then quietly exempt what hurts too much to lose. Take China, for example. Whenever it retaliates with tariffs, it makes a lot of noise. Big press conferences. Strong language. National pride on full display. But when it's time to quietly walk things back, maybe to keep the economy stable or avoid scaring off investors, China adds US goods to a discrete exemption list. No fanfare. No headlines. Since 2018, China has routinely exempted US exports from tariffs. These include tech, medical equipment, aircraft components, even agricultural goods and energy supplies, products China either can't make on its own or can't afford to source elsewhere without raising costs. These aren't favors, they're survival moves, so when both sides play the same card, calling one a winner and the other a loser is just missing the point.